This is the Dover Download Podcast. My name is Christopher Parker, and for the past 25 years, I've had the pleasure of working with, learning from, and talking to a variety of volunteer, staff, and community members. This podcast explores conversations, activities, and a variety of policies and programs which exist here in Dover to improve the community in one way or another. Here in Dover, we talk a lot about housing, and we probably could continue to talk about it daily, if not weekly, because it is a topic that touches us all. I'm being joined on this episode with Director Donna Benton. She is our Planning and Community Development Director, and Abby Muirhead, who is our housing planner. Ladies, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Chris.
So we're talking and airing this episode after you've done a presentation to the City Council on the 6th about activities in housing and reviewing and updating the housing report that the ad hoc committee did a year ago. Have we done a lot of housing, or are we mired in nowhere? Every box is checked? How are we doing in general?
I don't think every box is checked. I don't know if every single box for housing is going to be checked. I think we've made a lot of strides, and there are a lot of pathways to create housing in Dover. In 2024, Dover permitted over 500 housing units. There were some major projects that were included that year, like the waterfront development, the project on Grove Street. In 2025, we did see a reduction. There were only 159 units permitted that year. We do have lots of innovative land use policies that do promote housing in Dover. One to highlight is our TDR ordinance, transfer of development rights, that is undergoing some changes, but there is a pathway for units that are restricted to fair market rent. So the fee is waived for units that are restricted to rented at a lower rate. We have 109 TDR HUD restricted units in Dover.
So Donna, what are the odds that those 109 units would exist at all without that program?
Without TDR, I would say we'd probably only see a handful of new units come on each year. With Dover being so built out already, we need to look at more creative ways. So whether that's conditional use permits or density bonuses where we can have them more in the infill in the downtown, or using the transfer development rights program to have that density where it makes sense, and then to try to either conserve land where it makes sense or to try to have lower costs to housing where possible. But I mean, when you're looking at $300 a square foot at least to construct homes, they're going to be expensive no matter the density and the supply that we're able to help create.
And that's one of those things I think people lose sight of is we being the community and the city, don't control the costs associated with building.
Correct.
That it's not like someone in City Hall says, you know what, it'd be really good if we charged $50 a square foot to build a house in Dover. And then someone else said, no, it's got to be $300 a square foot. Because we don't see any of that. That is a market force.
Correct. There's not a lot in the market that we can actually control. So we can do our part by trying to make sure we're creative in allowing density and trying to make sure that there's incentives for developers to try to keep their costs down. But there's only so much authority that we have as the government.
And Abby, I know one of the things that you've talked to myself about and Donna about is ways that we can sort of avoid costs, meaning that looking at things like impact fees when we removed impact fees because we recognized it was an impact to the developer in the sense that it was a price added on that the final renter or owner had to pay.
And something that also is factored into the final cost is just land cost. I checked this morning and there are about 3 parcels of land that are zoned residential that are available for sale right now, all close to about a quarter of an acre. And the average is $234,000 for a quarter of acre of land in Dover.
You know, Donna, you and I have pretty decent amount of land use history together. And I don't think it's a shock that I like density. I like the urban living. I like the idea of that. And maybe it's just becoming a crotchety old man. The thing that I find is people take advantage of that. So the more we try to upzone area, meaning allow more units, the more the seller says, oh, my land is more valuable, just as Abby was saying, and that everyone wants their piece of the pie, which just must add to your need to be creative.
Right. Yep. There's a need to be creative and then also realistic of we need to consider things such as impacts to traffic and impacts to our resources. Luckily, community services seems to think we're okay on the utility side. So we have that going for us compared to maybe some of our neighboring communities that have that they need to consider of wellheads and water and where their septic is going.
And those are tangible things, but
Correct.
the other thing is the intangible, the community character, the neighborhood context, things like that.
And we always want to keep that in mind in Dover. I think one of the reasons people love Dover is that we have that rural aspect in certain parts, and then we have that true downtown in certain parts and everything in between.
When we look ahead, I know 15, 16 years ago, we started looking at the zoning ordinance and the site and subdivision every year. Are you still finding that the planning board finds value in that in ways to try to find ways to be more current or at least recognizing what's going on? Or is it becoming more burdensome because everyone wants to nitpick?
I would say it is more detailed in terms of clarifying. It's not making drastic changes of allowing extra density here in these zoning districts.
It's what Chris liked to call housekeeping.
Right. So your housekeeping versus the housekeeping now has been different. We wouldn't have the units that we have and we wouldn't be the city without that proactive thinking that you had 10 years ago. And so I'm looking at conference sessions and things of like, here's how communities can help solve the housing. And it's TDR, flexible ADUs, allowing duplexes by right. And it's all things that Dover has done proactively before all these other communities were really talking about housing being an issue.
And I like where you're going in the sense that the planning board has been really positive and proactive in the past. And I think without the planning board and without the city council saying yes to amendments.
Absolutely.
And in a lot of ways driving those amendments, saying we want to do these things. What I've always been concerned about is that while they're the forebears, they're also the standard bearers that are going to get hit with, how dare you? And not that I watch a lot of planning board meetings, but I do cringe every once in a while when a neighbor gets up and says, I can't believe you're allowing this to happen. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's something that I think that the planning board needs to be commended for, being able to say, I hear what you're saying. I hear your neighborly impact, but for the community's benefit, this is where we need to be.
Right. Yep. And I think they do try to hear the abutters and try to add screening or landscaping, fencing to try to minimize that. Or even we've had recent examples of the abutters prefer a certain siding color. I think there's times where we can try to take in the interests of the abutters and make sure that any impact they see isn't as negative as potentially could be.
Abby, there are resources out there. Workforce Housing Coalition, New Hampshire Housing Finance, Home for All, these groups that are promoting housing.
Yeah.
How do you interact with them? How does the city interact with them? How do the public or private developers interact with those groups?
I think Home for All is hosting an affordable housing week in May, and I'm a part of the coalition. I go to the meetings. I'm in the local advocacy work group, and their role in kind of this housing landscape is really to enhance the conversation, provide education and community awareness. And so there are several events that are happening in Dover that week. There is a tour at Back River Road, the cottages at Back River Road, that is being hosted by the Workforce Housing Coalition. Aplom, an art gallery and space, is having a week-long event that's I think it's at 6:30, that is having some sort of art and housing installation. Workforce Housing Coalition really is focusing on adding resources for municipalities. As Donna mentioned, Dover has really been ahead of the curve for many land use changes and is looked as a leader for other communities as kind of a menu of options that all of the things that are happening in Dover might not work for their community, but there's a lot of kind of options that could be implemented. So it's not just Dover providing housing for the community.
Donna, one of the things you mentioned was the flexibility with accessory dwelling units. Recently, you held a workshop on accessory dwelling units. How did that go?
It was packed. I think at the end of it, there was standing room only. So it was definitely well received. We've gotten good feedback that people appreciated having that information. I think it was a great team effort, both with staff from the City Hall Planning Office as well as our Inspection Services Division, so that as well as other outside lenders, so that there was information on all aspects of accessory dwelling units.
I was going to say, Abby, my understanding was it was an opportunity for someone to come and learn what an ADU is, how there might be special financing available to do it, and then have inspections talk about, here are some of the things you might want to think about as you're doing the actual construction, and then some of the deed restrictions and things like that. So it was really a soup to nuts.
It really was. What to expect, really.
When you're expecting.
Yes. If you're thinking about an ADU at all, what your options are. Is it going to work on your property? We took questions all throughout the presentation so everyone could ask their own questions. So it started with, what's an ADU? Can it work on my property? Once you've decided, yes, I would like to move forward with this, what the permitting process looks like, what applications and other supporting documents you need, really to walk you through the process so there are less unexpected kind of hiccups or any roadblocks. And then having the lenders there was great because that's kind of your final question. I can do this. It works. Now, how do I financially make it work?
Donna, that's an area that we've actually streamlined as well, because there used to be permit fees for renewals every year and a process. And when we went to the portal, we sort of streamlined some of that because there was less staff time in the reviews, correct?
Correct. Yep. So you still need to apply each year for a renewal, but there is no longer a fee each year to renew. It's just the one-time fee when you apply for ADUs.
And I'm kind of curious. I remember like 20 years ago, they were in-law apartments. Everyone thought of them as in-laws or something similar. Is that, do people still, is the ADU nomenclature coming around, or is it still pretty much?
Somewhat. I mean, we still hear like granny flats and, you know, all sorts of names for them. But I think ADUs and accessory dwelling units have become more popular, which I think is a win all in its own.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And they're quite popular in Dover. I think we have about 80 ADUs permitted in Dover. We saw 10 in 2025, and already in 2026, we've had 13 permits pulled.
Wow, that's
for
great.
ADUs.
I remember at one point we did a research project with some folks out of Harvard University, and they said that we had the most in the state. And that was probably, is that like 2017, 2018?
Yeah, probably.
It was us, and Ben Frost was the linkage between us and
New Hampshire Housing.
New Hampshire Housing and Harvard. So I hear it, so you two must hear it. Why don't we just tell developers they can't charge more than X a month? The rent is locked in at $900.
Because we legally can't here in New Hampshire tell people what the market should be, and that is market driven. And so it goes back to what we have authority over, and we can't. Even when we do the HUD rent restricted units, that's at least recorded at the registry, and it's part of the plan, part of the application, part of any HOA document to try to make sure that any future buyer understands that that rent needs to be restricted, but we don't income verify. So that unit could go to anyone, and that also helps with staff time, less administration oversight of it, but at least we are having that price point guaranteed.
You know, one of the things you and I have talked about over the years, Donna, is a certain point where you shouldn't want government involved in your private land transactions.
Right.
Because if I'm involved in your neighbors, I'm going to be involved in yours too. So be careful what you wish for.
Right.
And as you point out, we've always tried to be aware and open and transparent, and at the same time be also saying we're not adding bureaucracy, or we're not going to become the housing police force.
Right.
And that's not really our role at the planning department. It's more for, say, the Public Housing Authority, who receives
another
funding.
partner.
Yeah,
How do
another
they
partner.
interact with the housing needs here in the community?
They are probably the biggest provider of affordable housing in Dover. They recently built a new building, the first since 1998, and they offer 6 two-bedroom apartments in partnership with Haven, a domestic violence support agency in the area. They have 274 public housing units and provide housing to Dover's most vulnerable and extremely low income residents. They also provide senior housing and have a project, Jack Buckley Commons, that they've been renovating. And actually, they've just started to move residents back in. They're a wonderful partner. And we're able to provide some information for last week's presentation.
Oh, good. At a level, and I say this with a little bit of caution, but from a supply and demand, from a purely just recognizing the basic economic policies, all approvals the planning board makes and all issues of building permits that the inspection services make help the process, right? I mean, it's not going to necessarily solve it overnight, but I think that we can't lose sight of the fact that approvals are approvals. And the more homes in the supply, the more units available in the supply, up and down, it provides flexibility and spread so that you, Donna, might move out of your unit into another unit, opening up yours for Abby to move into, and then she moves into yours, and then I move into hers. And I think that's one of the things we need to keep our minds set on, is that the goal is to provide housing diversity here in the community.
Right, absolutely.
Housing's a continuum from being unsheltered to luxury apartments. And when there's not enough supply, if someone's renting a undermarket 2-bedroom apartment that really would love to purchase a home, if there aren't homes available to buy, if seniors who are looking to downsize don't have apartments that are affordable to move into, everyone on the continuum gets stuck. So adding more housing helps, even if it isn't only affordable housing. All apartments, all new single-family homes really add to the diverse housing stock of Dover.
You know, one thing that strikes me, keying off something you said earlier, Donna, about the age of the community and the amount we've been developed in the past, we've probably reached about 10 years ago the point where the easy land was gone.
Right.
And most of what you probably see at the planning board is stuff that needs conditional use permits for environmental or has other constraints that if it was great land to be developed, it would have been developed in the 80s or 70s. That pretty fair to say?
Definitely. So we are seeing, I think, a lot more conditional use permit requirements, either for environmental, like you mentioned, or for dimensional. So if it's not quite in line with the Bill 2 line or something like that, we've been seeing in certain districts either more variances come to the zoning board or conditional use permits to the planning board for both the dimensional requirements as well as environmental. If it's building or grading in the wetland buffer, that might need environmental relief through a conditional use permit.
Abby, one of the things you mentioned on Wednesday that I think we should be excited for is the housing dashboard that you're working on. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. It is a public-facing resource that's going to be embedded within Dover's website that really tracks housing production, where we are with the current housing stock, what has been permitted, when it's been permitted, when it's finally finished, to really track the progress we're making. It's hard to quantify in a single spot where all the progress we are making because the need is so high. Like Chris started out with, housing is always a topic of conversation, will always be a topic of conversation, and having a one-stop shop with live data that is interactive in a map with figures, be easy to understand, I think will really help shape the conversation moving forward. We're also hoping to include some affordable housing resources really to direct residents to the existing affordable housing that we have here in the city. We have close to 800 affordable housing units, if not a little more. And though they may not be currently a big percentage of what is actively being permitted, it is a significant piece of our current housing stock.
Donna, as we wrap up, is there anything we should be making sure the listener hears?
Abby, do you want to go over some of the CDBG, how we're leveraging our CDBG funds towards the housing efforts?
Yeah. So every year, Dover gets funding through the Community Development Block Grant, through HUD, through the federal government. And Historically, we've always provided funding to some of the local shelter resources, My Friend's Place, Haven, and Crossroads. We also provide some operational funding to some of the support service agencies around Dover and in the neighboring communities that help support Dover residents. This year, we are hoping to pilot a new program that utilizes CDBG funding to rehab some of the existing low-income rental properties we have in the city. It's going to be a pilot program this year, so we're hoping to partner with a local landlord who would like to do some renovations on their property, really to preserve the existing housing stock we have and help maintain it in the future. The funds will be used for critical life and safety updates, some just really general updates that were, if paid for by the landlord, may make the unit no longer affordable. The units have to be restricted to households that receive less than 80% of the area median income, and the units will be restricted for 3 years within HUD fair market rent. So we're really excited about that. As a new use of funding, like we said, we're not developers. We can't really help develop, but utilizing some funding in a creative way to help support the overall housing goals of the city.
That sounds great. I look forward to seeing that rolled out and seeing people utilize it. If people want any other information, what's the best way to reach out and learn more?
I would think email either myself or Dave Carpenter, who is our community development planner.
Great. Donna, you can have the last word.
I just think, based off this conversation and many others, that housing is just one piece of the planning department and really everyone's role. So we are doing what we can to help the situation, but certainly understand that not all of it can be solved by us. So taking that multifaceted approach and hitting as many facets as we can.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks.
Dover has a wealth of history in its over 400 years of existence. Coming up, Mike Gillis is going to share some of that history with us.
This week in 1887, Dover High School became the center of a heated controversy that not only involved the local community, but also raised questions about the integrity of its educational oversight. The issue reached a boiling point during a school board meeting on May 9, 1887, attended by a standing room-only crowd at City Hall. The controversy began with bold accusations made by the Enterprise, a newspaper published by the students of Dover High School. Managed by the young but forthright editor, John Quint, the publication had accused the school board of corruption and the practice of gross injustices against its student body. These allegations included claims that decisions on academic recognitions and participation in graduation ceremonies were being unfairly influenced by members' biases, particularly highlighting discrimination against Catholic students. The specific charge that ignited considerable uproar was that the board had allowed only 15 of the 27 graduating seniors to participate in the year-end ceremonies, ostensibly due to their religious affiliations. Another explosive allegation was the accusation of bribery within the school board. It was alleged that one of the board members had accepted a $100 bribe from a book agent to ensure the inclusion of Scudder's History of the United States in the high school curriculum, a rumor that had also been circulating in the community. As the controversy ignited, John Quint stood by his and the newspaper's accusations. The school board threatened a lawsuit, saying they would sue the students, but particularly John Quint, for libel and slander. As tensions mounted, the school board convened on May 9th to directly address these grievances. Reverend A. H. Quint, a board member and father of the editor, was among the first to speak. He conceded that his son's approach might have been impetuous, but underscored the importance of discussing the issues raised. The meeting evolved into a forum where multiple perspectives were aired, revealing the complexities of balancing administrative authority with student rights. Throughout the contentious meeting, board members expressed divergent views. Some argued for the essential role of student journalism in maintaining administrative accountability, suggesting that even if the students had been overzealous, their active engagement reflected a healthy democratic process within the educational setting. Others felt that the allegations were too grave to dismiss without thorough investigation. The board ultimately resolved to accept an apology from the Enterprise, which had been advised to publish a retraction of its most aggressive accusations. However, recognizing the need to restore public confidence, the board also voted to proceed with a formal investigation into all the allegations. The resolution to investigate passed narrowly by a vote of 9-6, illustrating the board's own conflicted sentiments about the veracity and impact of the accusations. Ultimately, the controversy and the investigation would be forgotten by year's end. In fact, by the time the city's annual report for 1887 was published, the school board chair would report, quote, "Nothing has occurred during the year to disturb the harmony of our schools. We have had a successful year, mainly due to the enthusiastic labors of an efficient corps of teachers, wisely directed by our able superintendent."
Thanks for listening to the Dover Download this week. If you like what you heard, subscribe through your favorite podcast aggregator. And if you have something you want to hear a topic on, let us know. Finally, this is just one of the many ways we share information about the city of Dover. You can subscribe to the Dover Downloads email newsletter every week or other newsletters that we have by going to the City of Dover homepage, www.dover.nh.gov. Have a great week.